Chapter 16. Of Paris, what am I to say? The whole proceeding was a delirium, a madness. I spent a little over 3 weeks there, and, during that time, saw my 100,000 francs come to an end. I speak only of the 100,000 francs, for the other 100,000 I gave to Mlle Blanche in pure cash. That is to say, I handed her 50,000 francs at Frankfurt, and, 3 days later, in Paris, advanced her another 50,000 on note of hand. Nevertheless, a week had not elapsed ere she came to me for more money. "Et les 100,000 francs qui nous restent," she added, "tu les mangeras avec moi, mon Huchetel." Yes, she always called me her Huchetel. A person more economical, grasping, and mean than Mlle Blanche one could not imagine. But this was only as regards her own money. My 100,000 francs, as she explained to me later, she needed to set up her establishment in Paris, so that once and for all I may be on a decent footing, and proof against any stones which may be thrown at me at all events for a long time to come. Nevertheless, I saw nothing of those 100,000 francs, for my own purse, which she inspected daily, never managed to amass in it more than 100 francs at a time, and, generally the sum did not reach even that figure. "What do you want with money?" she would say to me with air of absolute simplicity, and I never disputed the point. Nevertheless, though she fitted out her flat very badly with the money, the fact did not prevent her from saying when, later, she was showing me over the rooms of her new abode, "See what care and taste can do with the most wretched of means." However, her wretchedness had cost 50,000 francs, while with the remaining 50,000 she purchased a carriage and horses. Also, we gave a couple of balls, evening parties attended by Hortense and Lisette and Cléopâtre, who were women remarkable both for the number of their liaisons and, though only in some cases, for their good looks. At these reunions I had to play the part of host to meet and entertain fat mercantile parvenus who were impossible by reason of their rudeness and braggadocio, colonels of various kinds, hungry authors, and journalistic hacks, all of whom disported themselves in fashionable tailcoats and pale yellow gloves, and displayed such an aggregate of conceit and gasconade as would be unthinkable even in Street Petersburg, which is saying a great deal. They used to try to make fun of me, but I would console myself by drinking champagne and then lolling in a retiring room. Nevertheless, I found it deadly work. "C'est un Huchetel," Blanche would say of me, "qui a gagné 200,000 francs, and but for me, would have had not a notion how to spend them. Presently he will have to return to his tutoring. Does anyone know of a vacant post? You know, one must do something for him." I had the more frequent recourse to champagne in that I constantly felt depressed and bored, owing to the fact that I was living in the most bourgeois commercial milieu imaginable, a milieu wherein every sou was counted and grudged. Indeed, 2 weeks had not elapsed before I perceived that Blanche had no real affection for me, even though she dressed me in elegant clothes, and herself tied my tie each day. In short, she utterly despised me. But that caused me no concern. Blasé and inert, I spent my evenings generally at the Château des Fleurs, where I would get fuddled and then dance the can-can, which, in that establishment, was a very indecent performance, with éclat. At length, the time came when Blanche had drained my purse dry. She had conceived an idea that, during the term of our residence together, it would be well if I were always to walk behind her with a paper and pencil, in order to jot down exactly what she spent, what she had saved, what she was paying out, and what she was laying by. Well, of course I could not fail to be aware that this would entail a battle over every 10 francs, so, although for every possible objection that I might make she had prepared a suitable answer, she soon saw that I made no objections, and therefore, had to start disputes herself. That is to say, she would burst out into tirades which were met only with silence as I lolled on a sofa and stared fixedly at the ceiling. This greatly surprised her. At first she imagined that it was due merely to the fact that I was a fool, un Huchetel, wherefore she would break off her harangue in the belief that, being too stupid to understand, I was a hopeless case. Then she would leave the room, but return 10 minutes later to resume the contest. This continued throughout her squandering of my money, a squandering altogether out of proportion to our means. An example is the way in which she changed her first pair of horses for a pair which cost 16,000 francs. "Bibi," she said on the latter occasion as she approached me, "surely you are not angry?" "No, I am merely tired," was my reply as I pushed her from me. This seemed to her so curious that straightway she seated herself by my side. "You see," she went on, "I decided to spend so much upon these horses only because I can easily sell them again. They would go at any time for 20,000 francs. Yes, they are splendid horses, and you have got a splendid turnout. I am quite content. Let me hear no more of the matter." "Then you are not angry?" "No. Why should I be? You are wise to provide yourself with what you need, for it will all come in handy in the future. Yes, I quite see the necessity of your establishing yourself on a good basis, for without it you will never earn your million. My 100,000 francs I look upon merely as a beginning, as a mere drop in the bucket." Blanche, who had by no means expected such declarations from me, but, rather, an uproar and protests, was rather taken aback. "Well, well, what a man you are!" she exclaimed. "Mais tu es l'esprit pour comprendre. C'est tout, mon garçon, although you are a tutor, you ought to have been born a prince. Are you not sorry that your money should be going so quickly?" "No. The quicker it goes the better." "Mais c'est tu me dis donc, are you really rich?" "Mais c'est tu, you have too much contempt for money. Qu'est-ce que tu feras après, dis donc?" "Après I shall go to Hamburg, and win another 100,000 francs." Oui, c'est magnifique. Ah, I know you will win them, and bring them to me when you have done so. Dis donc you'll end by making me love you. Since you are what you are, I mean to love you all the time, and never to be unfaithful to you. You see, I have not loved you before parce que je croyais que tu ne connaissais quelque chose comme un laquais, n'est-ce pas? Yet all the time I have been true to you, parce que je suis bonne fille. You lie. I interrupted. Did I not see you, the other day, with Albert, with that black-jowled officer? Oh, mais tu es. Yes, you are lying right enough. But what makes you suppose that I should be angry? Rubbish. Il faut que je ne sais pas. Even if that officer were here now, I should refrain from putting him out of the room if I thought you really cared for him. Only, mind you, do not give him any of my money. You hear? You say, do you, that you would not be angry? Mais tu es un vrai philosophe, sais-tu? Oui, un vrai philosophe. Eh bien, je t'aimerai. Tu verras tu seras content. True enough, from that time onward she seemed to attach herself only to me, and in this manner we spent our last 10 days together. The promised étoile I did not see, but in other respects she, to a certain extent, kept her word. Moreover, she introduced me to Hortense, who is a remarkable woman in her way, and known among us as Therese Philosophe. But I need not enlarge further, for to do so would require a story to itself, and entail a coloring which I am loath to impart to the present narrative. The point is that with all my faculties I desire the episode to come to an end as speedily as possible. Unfortunately, our 100,000 francs lasted us, as I have said, for very nearly a month, which greatly surprised me. At all events, Blanche bought herself articles to the tune of 80,000 francs, and the rest sufficed just to meet our expenses of living. Towards the close of the affair, Blanche grew almost frank with me, at least, she scarcely lied to me at all, declaring, amongst other things, that none of the debts which she had been obliged to incur were going to fall upon my head. "I have purposely refrained from making you responsible for my bills or borrowings," she said, "for the reason that I am sorry for you. Any other woman in my place would have done so, and have let you go to prison. See, then, how much I love you, and how good-hearted I am. Think, too, what this accursed marriage with the general is going to cost me." True enough, the marriage took place. It did so at the close of our month together, and I am bound to suppose that it was upon the ceremony that the last remnants of my money were spent. With it the episode, that is to say, my sojourn with the Frenchwoman, came to an end, and I formally retired from the scene. It happened thus: a week after we had taken up our abode in Paris there arrived thither the general. He came straight to see us, and thenceforward lived with us practically as our guest, though he had a flat of his own as well. Blanche met him with merry badinage and laughter, and even threw her arms around him. In fact, she managed it so that he had to follow everywhere in her train, whether when promenading on the boulevards, or when driving, or when going to the theatre, or when paying calls, and this use which she made of him quite satisfied the general. Still of imposing appearance and presence, as well as of fair height, he had a dyed moustache and whiskers, he had formerly been in the Cuirassiers, and a handsome, though a somewhat wrinkled, face. Also, his manners were excellent, and he could carry a frock coat well, the more so since, in Paris, he took to wearing his orders. To promenade the boulevards with such a man was not only a thing possible, but also, so to speak, a thing advisable, and with this program the good but foolish general had not a fault to find. The truth is that he had never counted upon this program when he came to Paris to seek us out. On that occasion he had made his appearance nearly shaking with terror, for he had supposed that Blanche would at once raise an outcry, and have him put from the door, wherefore, he was the more enraptured at the turn that things had taken, and spent the month in a state of senseless ecstasy. Already I had learnt that, after our unexpected departure from Roulettenberg, he had had a sort of a fit that he had fallen into a swoon, and spent a week in a species of garrulous delirium. Doctors had been summoned to him, but he had broken away from them, and suddenly taken a train to Paris. Of course Blanche's reception of him had acted as the best of all possible cures, but for long enough he carried the marks of his affliction, despite his present condition of rapture and delight. To think clearly, or even to engage in any serious conversation, had now become impossible for him. He could only ejaculate after each word and then nod his head in confirmation. Sometimes, also, he would laugh, but only in a nervous, hysterical sort of a fashion, while at other times he would sit for hours looking as black as night, with his heavy eyebrows knitted. Of much that went on he remained wholly oblivious, for he grew extremely absent-minded, and took to talking to himself. Only Blanche could awake him to any semblance of life. His fits of depression and moodiness in corners always meant either that he had not seen her for some while, or that she had gone out without taking him with her, or that she had omitted to caress him before departing. When in this condition, he would refuse to say what he wanted, nor had he the least idea that he was thus sulking and moping. Next, after remaining in this condition for an hour or two, this I remarked on 2 occasions when Blanche had gone out for the day, probably to see Albert, he would begin to look about him, and to grow uneasy, and to hurry about with an air as though he had suddenly remembered something, and must try and find it, after which, not perceiving the object of his search, nor succeeding in recalling what that object had been, he would as suddenly relapse into oblivion, and continue so until the reappearance of Blanche, merry, wanton, half-dressed, and laughing her strident laugh as she approached to pet him, and even to kiss him, though the latter reward he seldom received. Once, he was so overjoyed at her doing so that he burst into tears. Even I myself was surprised. From the first moment of his arrival in Paris, Blanche set herself to plead with me on his behalf, and at such times she even rose to heights of eloquence, saying that it was for me she had abandoned him, though she had almost become his betrothed and promised to become so, that it was for her sake he had deserted his family, that, having been in his service, I ought to remember the fact, and to feel ashamed. To all this I would say nothing, however much she chattered on, until at length I would burst out laughing, and the incident would come to an end. At first, as I have said, she had thought me a fool, but since she had come to deem me a man of sense and sensibility. In short, I had the happiness of calling her better nature into play, for though, at first, I had not deemed her so, she was, in reality, a kind-hearted woman after her own fashion. "You are good and clever," she said to me towards the finish, "and my one regret is that you are also so wrong-headed. You will never be a rich man." Un vrai russe en calme she usually called me. Several times she sent me to give the general an airing in the streets, even as she might have done with a lackey and her spaniel, but I preferred to take him to the theatre, to the Ballmobile, and to restaurants. For this purpose she usually allowed me some money, though the general had a little of his own, and enjoyed taking out his purse before strangers. Once I had to use actual force to prevent him from buying a phaeton at a price of 700 francs, after a vehicle had caught his fancy in the Palais Royal as seeming to be a desirable present for Blanche. What could she have done with a 700-franc phaeton? And the general possessed in the world but 1,000 francs. The origin even of those francs I could never determine, but imagine them to have emanated from Mr. Astley, the more so since the latter had paid the family's hotel bill. As for what view the general took of myself, I think that he never divined the footing on which I stood with Blanche. True, he had heard, in a dim sort of way, that I had won a good deal of money, but more probably he supposed me to be acting as secretary or even as a kind of servant to his inamorata. At all events, he continued to address me, in his old haughty style, as my superior. At times he even took it upon himself to scold me. One morning in particular, he started to sneer at me over our matutinal coffee. Though not a man prone to take offense, he suddenly, and for some reason of which to this day I am ignorant, fell out with me. Of course even he himself did not know the reason. To put things shortly, he began a speech which had neither beginning nor ending, and cried out, a batons rompus, that I was a boy whom he would soon put to rights and so forth, and so forth. Yet no one could understand what he was saying, and at length Blanche exploded in a burst of laughter. Finally something appeased him, and he was taken out for his walk. More than once, however, I noticed that his depression was growing upon him, that he seemed to be feeling the want of somebody or something, that, despite Blanche's presence, he was missing some person in particular. Twice, on these occasions, did he plunge into a conversation with me, though he could not make himself intelligible, and only went on rambling about the service, his late wife, his home, and his property. Every now and then, also, Some particular word would please him, whereupon he would repeat it 100 times in the day even though the word happened to express neither his thoughts nor his feelings. Again, I would try to get him to talk about his children, but always he cut me short in his old snappish way, and passed to another subject. Yes, yes, my children, was all that I could extract from him. Yes, you are right in what you have said about them. Only once did he disclose his real feelings. That was when we were taking him to the theater, and suddenly he exclaimed, "My unfortunate children." Yes, sir, they are unfortunate children. Once, too, when I chanced to mention Polina, he grew quite bitter against her. "She is an ungrateful woman," he exclaimed. "She is a bad and ungrateful woman. She has broken up a family. If there were laws here, I would have her impaled." Yes, I would. As for de Griers, the general would not have his name mentioned. "He has ruined me," he would say. "He has robbed me, and cut my throat." For 2 years he was a perfect nightmare to me. For months at a time he never left me in my dreams. Do not speak of him again. It was now clear to me that Blanche and he were on the point of coming to terms, yet, true to my usual custom, I said nothing. At length, Blanche took the initiative in explaining matters. She did so a week before we parted. "Il a du chance," she prattled, "for the grandmother is now really ill, and therefore, bound to die. Mr. Astley has just sent a telegram to say so, and you will agree with me that the general is likely to be her heir. Even if he should not be so, he will not come amiss, since, in the first place, he has his pension, and, in the second place, he will be content to live in a back room, whereas I shall be Madame General, and get into a good circle of society." She was always thinking of this, and become a Russian chatelaine. "Yes, I shall have a mansion of my own, and peasants, and $1 million of money at my back." But, suppose he should prove jealous? He might demand all sorts of things, you know. Do you follow me? Oh, dear no. How ridiculous that would be of him. Besides, I have taken measures to prevent it. You need not be alarmed. That is to say, I have induced him to sign notes of hand in Albert's name. Consequently, at any time I could get him punished. Isn't he ridiculous? Very well, then. Marry him. And, in truth, she did so, though the marriage was a family one only, and involved no pomp or ceremony. In fact, she invited to the nuptials none but Albert and a few other friends. Hortense, Cléopâtre, and the rest she kept firmly at a distance. As for the bridegroom, he took a great interest in his new position. Blanche herself tied his tie, and Blanche herself pomaded him, with the result that, in his frock coat and white waistcoat, he looked quite comme il faut. "Il est, pourtant, très comme il faut," Blanche remarked when she issued from his room, as though the idea that he was très comme il faut had impressed even her. For myself, I had so little knowledge of the minor details of the affair, and took part in it so much as a supine spectator, that I have forgotten most of what passed on this occasion. I only remember that Blanche and the widow figured at it, not as de Comminges, but as du Placet. Why they had hitherto been de Comminges I do not know. I only know that this entirely satisfied the general, that he liked the name du Placet even better than he had liked the name de Comminges. On the morning of the wedding, he paced the salon in his gala attire and kept repeating to himself with an air of great gravity and importance, "Mille. Blanche du Placet. Mille. Blanche du Placet, du Placet." He beamed with satisfaction as he did so. Both in the church and at the wedding breakfast he remained not only pleased and contented, but even proud. She too underwent a change, for now she assumed an air of added dignity. "I must behave altogether differently," she confided to me with a serious air. "Yet, mark you, there is a tiresome circumstance of which I had never before thought, which is, how best to pronounce my new family name. Zagoriansky, Zagoziansky, Madame la Générale de Sago, Madame la Générale de 14 consonants. So these infernal Russian names. The last of them would be the best to use, don't you think?" At length the time had come for us to part, and Blanche, the egregious Blanche, shed real tears as she took her leave of me. "Tu étais bon enfant," she said with a sob. "Je te croyais bête et tu en avais l'air, but it suited you." Then, having given me a final handshake, she exclaimed, "Attends," whereafter, running into her boudoir, she brought me thence 2,000-franc notes. I could scarcely believe my eyes. "They may come in handy for you," she explained, "for, though you are a very learned tutor, you are a very stupid man. More than 2,000 francs, however, I am not going to give you, for the reason that, if I did so, you would gamble them all away. Now goodbye. Nous serons toujours bons amis, and if you win again, do not fail to come to me, et tu seras heureux." I myself had still 500 francs left, as well as a watch worth 1,000 francs, a few diamond studs, and so on. Consequently, I could subsist for quite a length of time without particularly bestirring myself. Purposely I have taken up my abode where I am now, partly to pull myself together, and partly to wait for Mr. Astley, who, I have learned, will soon be here for a day or so on business. Yes, I know that, and then I shall go to Hamburg. But to Roulettenberg I shall not go until next year, for they say it is bad to try one's luck twice in succession at a table. Moreover, Hamburg is where the best play is carried on.